Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of that Weems guy. We've got a pretty good group here together, if you even even if you include Hearne. But he's here. We do have a nerd question we have to discuss later on, and so we're like, all right, we'll let Hearne come play. We'll get around to introducing the guests in just a moment. I do want to, before we get started, take a moment to thank everyone who has reached out to check on the status of me and mine this week. We are all good. um, the local, the school shooting incident that has been all over the news this weekend is a local incident. Um, there is some personal impact, but we're all okay. We're fine, uh, physically anyway, and we're dealing with everything else. I guess I'm 10 days out from the first cataract removal, and that went off very, very, very well. I am already back to 20/20 in the right eye. Someone surgically attached front sights back to all of my pistols, and I am extremely happy about that. The next eye comes up on the 19th, and so I'm looking very much forward to getting back to 20/20 vision in both eyes. That's going to be exciting. All right, so we're going to get started with introducing the guests, and I'm going to go a clockwise fashion. First up, John Hearne.
John Hearne here, retired cop, started in 92, retired at the very end of last year. Been a long-time Range Master staff instructor, speaking, presenting since 2005. Have my own training company these days called Two Pillars Training, and continue to do some work for Tom Givens.
All right, Mark.
Mark Fricke, retired sergeant out of Prescott, Arizona. Been a cop for 28 years. Been a fire instructor since 1980. Worked for Arizona Post. Worked for another company in the Sergeant Company in 92, and been doing that. My cop career started in 72, so been around for a bit on that. Anyway, so that's kind of me, and I just work for a national training organization also that I train instructor development schools all around the country. So that's me.
All right, Eric.
Eric Gelhaus, retired patrol sergeant out of Sonoma County, California. Did 29 years there. Also prior military. Been teaching at Gunsight since 2000. Have my company, Cougar Mountain Solutions, and I'm the editor over at AmericanCop.com.
All right, we had a listener requested topic for tonight, or maybe a viewer requested topic tonight, because some people listen on the audio version, some people watch the video version. I'll go ahead and tell you right now, there may be some techniques demonstrated. So if you are listening to this on the audio version, I want to see what that looks like, go back and check out the video version later. All right, but we're going to talk about malfunction clearances and how they have changed over time, and we will have Hearne nerd out at some point in time on that. We're going to discuss a handy new piece of equipment that's out there for training purposes. But before we do all of that, since Mark was already a cop when I was still in diapers, we're going to let Mark talk about the history of the evolution of malfunction techniques.
Well, to go back to when I started was revolvers. Very few agencies were carrying semi-automatics except for the military. I mean, there were a few, but not many. And I didn't have much exposure to it because I was in the Air Force, so I've given revolvers. And most revolvers, if you get a malfunction during the middle of a gunfight, you're probably not going to be able to clear it and get back into the fight. A second gun would be your best bet to go and finish that as you go. As we went into semi-automatics, I was a big follower of Jeff Cooper, and as soon as I could in 1978, I went to Gunsight and learned a lot about semi-autos that I didn't know. I still carried a revolver because that was my duty gun, but I used it. But I remember back in the days there, and I've got an old historic reference book here that the 1911 running high power, pretty much with the primary single actions. Then you had a few with the 39s and 59s that you would see from some agencies were going to. But malfunction clearances were kind of an afterthought to start. Then with Cooper, they came up and they developed 5 different malfunction clearances for the various things, specifically the 1911, because of its unique design, holding the firing pin, etc. And we, over the years, went from just a simple tap right bang, which everybody went away from because you don't want people banging as an automatic response. You want to have a decision-making response to it, not a pre-programmed response. assess, ready, whatever words you want to use for it. But we got away from the tap, rack, bang era fairly shortly on, at least in Arizona. We did back in the very early 80s when I started with my own department here. So that's kind of the historic part of malfunction clearances. We've simplified them down. I think Eric will cover more of that. Primarily to 2, if you want to consider it down to 2, although you could have 3 depending again on your doctor. But I primarily teach 2 malfunction clearances for the semi-auto pistol if something goes bad. So that's kind of a historic reference to it, unless you need something more detailed.
The other thing I'll throw in there as far as history goes, I think it's important to note that for the longest time, the 1911 was predominant. So a lot of the early malfunction clearances were almost exclusively there to solve 1911 problems. And as we got away from 1911s, the distinction of a stovepipe, that vertical orientation of a fired case is a very 1911 specific thing. So it's important to remember the historical context, not just of the techniques, but of the equipment that we had to deal with as well.
Right.
And that is an issue in that a fair amount of what's taught in this area, as well as with reloads, quite frankly, does stem or does have a 1911 centric base to it. Right? That's what the school that started codifying all this and pushing it out had as their predominant pistol.
But I'll tell you that stovepipes are rare these days. They do happen. I was taking a Glock transition school with Dennis Tudor, and we then got to shoot a brand new Glock Gen 4, and gave him my Gen 1. He gave me his Gen 4. I shot it and was using some just U.S. ball ammo. I don't remember if it was white box or federal. I don't remember what, but there was an actual honest to God stovepipe straight up in the case. I had not seen one for so many years. I actually stopped, looked at it, and went, "That's a stovepipe, an honest to God stovepipe." And I cleared it, and I did it a second time. I gave his gun back to him and took mine that didn't do that. So, but they still can happen.
What you typically see in the modern pistols is more of the cartridge gets jammed in the chamber lengthwise.
Yeah.
And if you use the old stovepipe method of sweeping across the top of the slide to knock out that round with one that is in wedged with the casing opening to the front, you get a nice little cookie cutter chunk taken out of your finger.
And not a clear gun.
Yeah. And blood and stuff all over your gun to make the situation worse. Yeah, Eric is showing that in the video feed.
Yeah. So the problem there is for you guys that haven't encountered something like this, you come and attack the case as opposed to doing an overhand or rack and roll, is now you core sample your hand while you're trying to clear it out. So the gunfight's bad, the stoppage in the middle of the gunfight's worse, and now you just started taking off parts of your own body.
And history has shown us that blood is a suboptimal lube when it comes to firearms.
Yes.
It's slippery.
All right, I want to go back to something that Mark said during his rundown first. As he mentioned a malfunction with revolvers. But Mark, the internet says revolvers don't malfunction.
What they say.
That and gun shop guys.
Sure. Revolvers, if properly maintained, are extremely reliable. We all 4 of us know that. I think most of the world knows that. But things can go wrong. If you've got ammunition that doesn't go bang, the idea behind you pull the trigger again and get the second one up, yeah, that's true. If you get a true dud round, you're probably in good shape. But if you get a squib round, you're lucky if it clears the forcing cone and goes to the barrel. So if you're on the street, you could fire a second time and you're going to ruin your gun, but at least maybe you'll get something coming out of it. But more likely it's going to stop between the cylinder face and the forcing cone, and now you've got a very ineffective club when it comes to it. Additionally, it may not have a squib, but if you've got ammunition that's improperly crimped, excessive recoil, especially in a lightweight revolver, and you're shooting like Magnum ammunition, you could have bullet pull, and the bullet could come out of the case, be pulled out by inertia, and go in front of the cylinder face, and again, jam up the gun as it tries to rotate to the forcing cone. A little funny story on that is my wife became a fire instructor for my business. She worked for my business for a while, so we butters through fire instructor school. I gave her my Model 10, my favorite Model 10 that I used for my duty gun for years and years. Bought brand new factory ammunition for her, so she had brand new factory 158 grain lead round nose, and she's going through, and all of a sudden she can't pull the trigger. And the other instructor and I are being very, supportive, screaming at her, "Come on, muscle through it, muscle through it." And she's going, and she looks at me with, you can imagine the look, and said, "I almost threw the revolver through the target." Well, it turned out that she suffered from bullet pull, a lead round nose bullet pulled out of the case and went up and got stuck by the cylinder face and the forcing cone. And there was no way she was going to do it. She almost cut the bullet tip off. She also knocked the revolver out of time, which now I had to go get it fixed, but that was my own fault for doing it. So it can happen.
One of the last quals I shot with my backup gun at my old job when I was working extra help, I had bullet pull in a little J-frame with frangible ammo that we used on the range and locked it up bigger than snot. Same thing.
Ejector rod can get unscrewed and cause cylinder either not to turn, not to open, or not to close. That's something that was a fix you could do in the field, but if you had a shrouded ejector rod, it made it much more difficult to do. Getting any powder or any debris underneath the ejector star will cause a malfunction on the gun, which will stop it. That happened in the FBI shootout when bone fragments and skin got underneath the star of one of the agent's revolvers and locked the gun up. So these are things that can happen. Again, revolvers are probably maintained, extremely reliable, and doesn't happen often, but to say it can't happen is a fallacy.
Mark, do you want to touch on if you get a case that slips under the ejector star?
Sure. So with a full-length extractor rod, more often than not, if you did not hold the gun vertical as you're hitting the extractor on the gun, it'll cause the case to fall down under the extractor star, which again will lock the gun up because the cylinder can't close because the ejector star won't go up to where it needs to do it. Revolvers, again, good guns, but tolerances are much tighter than some automatics, and anything that gets under that star, whether it's a case, a piece of a brush from a cleaning brush, or powder from unburned powder from a cartridge, can cause a gun to lock up. So that is an issue. Smith & Wesson was a real problem with it because of the first revolvers, the M&P and Model 10s, etc. Their full-length extractor case was built around, or ejector was built around longer cases like 357 Magnums, but 38s would fall underneath it pretty easy. Toward the latter part, probably about 10-8, somewhere in there, they fixed that by making the extractor throw a little shorter than the 38 special case, so it didn't make it as easy to get it stuck underneath it.
Hearne has raised his hand very politely, so we're going to let him talk.
Well, to throw in, I think, talking about the history, is that we forget that we live in the golden age of equipment and ammunition. And one of the problems I see with malfunctions is that they tend to happen in training so rarely that we don't know how to deal with them. I had an interesting experience. I got out of the J-frame market a long time ago, but I picked up one of the cool new UC revolvers. It was like probably the first time in decades I had like a cool kid gun when it had first come out. And I had some 38 reloads, precision Delta reloads that were probably about 30 years old, right? As a note on the, not a note on the gun itself, but that gun went 10 rounds with that ammunition before it completely seized. So, historically, I think the ammo was a lot crappier back in the day as well, which led to a lot of these problems that you're discussing. Because like I said, that brand new revolver, there might have been a phone call to Eastridge going, "What the hell have you sold me?" when it comes to that. But it just turns out it was just, crappy ammo spewing, crap amongst the gun, and they just don't tolerate that.
I have personally experienced the squib load that got stuck between the cylinder and the forcing cone, and it was that was a trip to the gunsmith to get it unlocked. They actually had to put a rod down the barrel and beat the round back into the shell casing to get the cylinder to open.
Masada, you many years ago had a D-jam rod, and it was attached. It looked like a Kubaton. In fact, it could be easily used as a Kubaton that you'd put on and smash it up against something hard, put the rod down and smash it to knock it back in. PPC, I shot a lot of PPC. I've got a stuck round remover that's got a big old head on the end of it. and I can hit it with enough force that I can usually knock a lead round out. You get a jacketed bullet in there, it's a different story. That's going to take a hammer to really beat on it to get it out of there. But I've had them happen, and it's, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a mechanical device.
And whatever the rate is, you're never going to clear that in the middle of a gunfight.
Nope. That's a second gun.
Now, I will defend the revolver in this, that most of those issues are ammunition issues. They are not the equipment issue.
Right.
Agreed. You also can have other things that can happen with the gun. The strain screw comes loose on a Smith & Wesson revolver K-frame or any in-frame that has a strain screw in the front, and you get light strikes. A lot of people like to lighten that screw, thinking it reduces the trigger pull and still get some reliable action. But as it continues to shoot, if it isn't tight, it will loosen up more, and eventually you're going to get light strikes and not have shooting. But again, that's not an issue for the gun itself. That's an issue for the operator and ammunition. I carry nothing but revolvers. I train with autos all the time because I teach them. But as far as since I've retired, I maybe carried a semi-automatic maybe a week or two out of 24 years. I'm a revolver guy, and I carry revolvers, and I've never had a problem with my carry revolvers because I keep them clean too. I clean them every once a month. I clean them. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But I do the same with my autos when I carried it, clean at least once a month to make sure it's properly lubed up and oiled and ready to go.
Yeah, I have seen issues with people who just don't know. They don't keep the yoke screw tight, and they end up popping a cylinder out of the gun.
That happens too. I've seen that.
But that's a user problem. It's not the gun problem.
Just like the strain screw on the front of the hand or the grip. That's a user issue.
Yeah. All right. So a very good friend of mine, he's been on the show a number of times, is a guy named Eric Lund. Eric's a USPSA Grandmaster. So that means internet, he's allowed to have an opinion on shooting things. He was also a cop for a very, very, very long time. And he is retired now. I spent a lot of time on the range with Eric, and he simplified this whole thing. He said, you either have a double feed or you have everything else. There's just two things now for clearing a malfunction in a pistol. And of course, double feed goes by the is properly termed as a failure to extract.
Thank you.
Somebody just said something.
I said thank you. It's not, but
yeah,
that's a life thing.
All right. Well, now you have the floor, Eric. Go ahead.
No, it was just because we saw it with the rifles, it carried over to the semi-auto pistols is the terminology, right? It's not a double feed because we don't have double column pistol magazines, right? It's a failure to extract.
Right. The four that are common in a pistol are failure to feed, fire, eject, and extract. And the extract, you fix it by unloading the gun and reloading the gun. And the other three you fix by tapping. Yes, you must tap or smack the magazine, rack the slide. And that typically fixes those.
As long as you don't block the ejection port, which you can do easily with a small gun or little pocket pistols we all like to carry and have, because the slide is so small and it's hard to do. If you grab it in the wrong place, you'll just induce another malfunction.
I have seen a greater instance of that with people with pistol mounted optics.
Yes.
Yep.
And so Eric, now would be a good time for you to chow in with that.
So we talked about the whole tap rack bang, then it got to be tap rack assess, and then it got to be tap roll rack, and then John's going to talk about his experience with Dave Spalding's clearance.
Oh, I should have gotten that video ready to play.
I told you to get that video ready to play. But okay, so live gun, but dummy rounds, right? Nothing but dummy rounds. ETS magazines with dummy rounds in there. What'll happen is people will smash the base of the magazine, come over and grab it, usually at the front end of the optic, covering the ejection port. And now when they go to run it, whatever's coming out isn't going to the ground. It's going into their fingers and then going back into the gun.
Yep.
Locking it up. So whereas you had just a failure to fire before, now you've got what looks like a failure to extract because you've got two rounds trying to occupy the same space.
John, you want to say something?
I was going to say, it just goes back to proper gun fit real quick. You know, we had a guy come through that could have been a direct stand-in for Lurch. I mean, he's this ginormous dude. And for whatever reason, he had selected for himself a SIG 228. And like literally on his hand, if he did anything but like do a saddle grip with anything but the last two fingers, he occluded the ejection. Those are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to gun fit. Is like, hey, if you have and you see it now with all the micro pistols, you have dudes that are like over 6 foot tall, and they're opting to carry a 365, and I'm like, dude, that's not enough gun for you as a practical matter.
All right. This plays in with what we're talking about, and Eric and I getting to make, and Mark, you can join in too, getting to make fun of John. As people shooting the optics, a pistol with a pistol mounted optic, they tend to exclude that ejection port.
Mhm.
I've been leaning more and more towards the inboard manipulations that is taught by Dave Spalding, because that solves that problem. Is you're not going to include the ejection port if you are running the gun inboard and grabbing with the thumb and the forefinger onto the and running the action.
A slingshot.
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily a slingshot, but it is an
pinch.
inboard manipulation. It's a pinch.
It ends up being a pinch where, and I'll argue against it here. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'll argue against it.
Go right ahead.
You don't have the strength pinching it. If you've been in a fight, you may have damaged the thumbs in the course of this, right? Whereas at least with an overhand grip, you're not likely to have all four fingers compromised with the overhand grip. Now, the thing is, don't block it. So grab the optic or grab the slide behind it. What I have also seen, and I'm starting to work with it some, is coming up in front, especially for me as a left-hander, is coming up, grabbing the front of the slide ahead of the ejection port. So smash, and if I do anything, it would be there versus here.
Yeah. I like to pinch the front of the optic with the thumb and the forefinger and run it. But as you say, if you got an injured thumb, that's not going to work. Now here's where we make fun of John, is if you try to change one of these on the fly, when you've actually got something that is hard grained wired in, you're going to run into problems. So John, talked to us about primacy and why it screws you up.
So we can think of kind of two ends of a spectrum. You've got primacy and recency we need to discuss. And I'm probably going to step on some toes because the definitions, depending on your realm, vary a little bit here. But primacy as a general rule says that the way you first learn to do something is going to be your dominant response. On the other hand, you have this idea of recency, which is the last time a skill is practiced is going to be fairly predictive of how well you can do it. So where you start to see this is, let's say I've learned assiduously after lots of practice, because I used to live this monastic life in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, where all I did was buy ammo and buy classes. That you just sat around your house and conducted type 3 malfunctions. You just get to the point that you can run that pretty quickly. Well, then when you're in a class and the instructor has a different method that you want to try, and when one of your good dear friends is recording all of this, right? You're going to run the.
Not me. It was not me.
I said good dear friend, not bad dear friend. There's different categories. I literally had every intention of running it the way Spalding did, but at that point in your brain, I said, hey, I flipped on the motor program that said, clear the double feed, and I just automatically went to the strip, or the lock, strip, rack, insert rack. And it was not a conscious, deliberate act. It was just I needed that motor program. That was the one that came up. So you have those competing interests there. The other place I've struggled with primacy is just with grip. I've changed shooting grip 3 times in my life, and it's one of those things. I don't care what happens. I'm not changing it again, because once you've established those motor programs very effectively, they're very resistant to change. Is that what you wanted to hear?
Yeah, keep talking because I'm trying to get the video to load.
Of course. So in recency is one of the big things that we tend to underappreciate. It's one of the biggest nerd things I don't think that people get, is just that the motor skills go away when they're not practiced. That's how that tends to work out.
Yeah. For those of you that are doing the audio version of this, I will post that video of John screwing up in the show Facebook group, so you all be able to see it.
Did you get the gun clear?
Oh, absolutely, and quickly, right? Most assiduously.
You get it right. Doesn't matter.
So let's just hit. Now the video is coming up.
Are you guys hearing the audio from the video?
No, I'm not hearing it.
Okay, let me play around and see if I can figure out how to do that. Y'all go back and talk about something very interesting.
John, going back to the recency thing, what have you seen on it research wise? There's an old study that I've been told about, but I've never seen, regarding recency specific to firearms capabilities and where the fall off is time wise.
So we have a bunch of anecdotal information, and again, the plural of anecdote isn't data, but it certainly gives us a good point to look at. We hear rumors and grumblings and stuff like that. When Bob Young was in charge of the Marine Fast Units, he would send their, they noted that because they had a very high standard, that if they laid off, for a couple of weeks, they would lose the top 20% of their skill. But that's a very, very high level of skill. What we tend to see in gunfight winners is live fire, even a small amount once a month. I would say if you're dry practicing twice a week, live fire, even if it's just 30 rounds, because it goes back to the fact that the gun exploding in your face is not natural, and you have to number one, habituate yourself, which I think is why so many people struggle. They never habituate themselves to the muzzle blast, but then they have to maintain that habituation to the muzzle blast. So handling the gun twice a week to make sure you've got the manipulations down, because it is a combat triad, right? And then some kind of live fire, at least once a month, seems to be pretty good. I know there was another rumored piece of research out there with another high-end military group, and they found that what they needed to maintain their standards was 50 rounds every week. They found that they could slip back to 100 rounds every 2 weeks, but there was no combination similar that would work. You can't do 400 rounds once a month and keep up. That's how quickly those skills kind of slip off from being front-loaded in the mind and just readily be available. And again, other information on, we had the guys in Metro shooting the bonus course every 30 days. It goes back to, again, handle the gun twice a week, shoot it once a month, and you'll probably be okay.
Throw out something too, is most agencies, when they'll train, they teach the malfunction clearances, but then they don't continue practicing them. And very few qualifications incorporate malfunction clearances as part of it. My agency, that was a prerequisite, and it actually was required that you had to clear the malfunctions and do reload drills prior to the qual, and you had to do it correctly 2 out of 3 times. And if you didn't, then you lost actual points off your score of the qualification, even if you shot a perfect score. The current Arizona post qualification does have failure to fire malfunction as part of the qualification course. They don't have a failure to feed or failure to eject version of it, but we did every time we practiced, we went out and did malfunction clearances every single time we were at range, and we went out there 4 times a year. So we had 4 shoots a year, and that kept our guys able to keep those practices down and get those malfunction clearances well. Looks like Lee's ready.
I think I have it done. When I started, Eric, if you're hearing audio, give me a thumbs up and I'll just let it keep rolling. If not, I'll stop it. Here we are, live on video. Will John screw it up?
Guys on target, remember you gotta press the trigger to the tack rack. That tells you what's wrong. Ready?
The shaking of the head is an indicator of wrongdoing.
And there's Dave's smiling face.
Yeah, I love that video. It's one of 2 that I have of John just like really screwing things up, and like I just randomly send them to him every now and then. Like sometimes I send it in the middle of the night, so when he wakes up in the morning, that's the first thing he sees on his phone. It's just fun.
You kept it, you got it cleared. Who cares?
Yeah. And the other thing is just, and I think Mark had a great point there with the frequency of the training. The other problem with training this stuff is that we almost always train it as a pre-set up response as far as this stuff goes, and it's coming. The problem in the real world is that, when we look at the FBI data, when we look at the results of the NTI, is malfunctions happen a lot more in real world gunfights than they ever actually do on the square range. We see that rather conclusively. So a big part of the problem is, number one, people aren't training the malfunction clearances that often, but they're also not encountering them in that training as a sudden surprise event that they didn't know was coming. I think that's one of the big holes in a lot of training that's fairly easy to fix.
It's getting people to plug in dummy rounds so you get the failure to fire. that
Right.
trainer that we're gonna talk about for the failure to extract or create something that looks like a double feed, right? I had some earlier this year or last year. Did a review on them for American Cop. They work extremely well, the new ones that are out, and they have a version for the M4 AR-15 as well.
Okay, nice.
Going to what John was just saying there, I have a pistol that is extremely accurate, but sometimes it will malfunction. And I keep this pistol. I know I could send it back to the factory and because I know it's causing it and they could fix it, but I don't want to because it's training gold. I keep that pistol and I like to shoot it in training just because I just occasionally I get a real honest to goodness malfunction when it's not planned in a drill. And to me, it's worth more as a training aid than it is getting this one pistol fix.
The
Go
use
ahead.
of dummy rounds is critical, and I think it should be done not necessarily during qualification because that's a test of training. Unless you got to have it, we want to set up because Arizona Post again has a fair to fire clearance required as part of the qualification course. But the fact is, you put those in during training and make guys do clearances on them. And this new one that sets up your fair to extract and sets up your double feed will be very useful. And I have not had practice with them yet. I'm going to get you in about 2 weeks, and we're looking forward to seeing how they work.
All right, John, I think now would be a good time to talk about that device.
Before I go, so the other thing is, it's like I don't think it takes that many reps to get this stuff done. I took the first open enrollment class Jeff Gonzalez ever taught, and it was half a day on Friday, and we did everything you would normally do in a class with 2 hands. But the caveat to that was there was a dummy round loaded in literally every magazine. And it was just like, one afternoon of just, to develop that automatic response to the tap, just, when as soon as the gun goes click, you tap and you rack it. It doesn't take that much work to ingrain that thing along the way. So I was going to throw that out there. Speaking of dummies, the other thing I'll throw out equipment wise is I've been playing around with, I think some of the other people are, the dummies from Glock. For years, plastic dummies had a very, very bad reputation. The dummies you can get from Glock are much more durable now, and they're like 40 cents a piece, which is way better than the higher quality snap caps as far as that stuff goes. You have to order them directly from Glock, but they are holding up really, really well from what I've seen.
One note on that, those are made in the factory in Austria. They aren't made here in Smyrna. And the supply on those is very hit or miss. So if you see them in stock and you want them, grab them.
Good to know.
How do the rims hold up on those? Because that's been the big knock on the all plastic dummies, is the rims getting chewed up very quickly versus like the ST Action Pros that are using a nickel case and a plastic insert.
They're not perfect, but they hold up really well. Again, if you were a sad, pathetic loser, you might take 10 of them and do nothing but sit around in the house one night once everybody's in bed and set up double feeds and repeatedly clear them. And you'll see some wear and stuff like that, but you're not getting those huge honking chips out of the rims. Our good friend Lane Thayer says he uses them in the academy, and they will eventually wear out. But dude, I mean, everything eventually wears out, and if they're 40 cents a piece versus what are we paying, $1.10, $1.25 for some of the others? I think that the return on investment is there.
What I have seen with some of the HC Action Pros and Gen 5s is there was a difference in the dimension of the Gen 5 chamber, and ST Action Pros weren't working with those.
Lee,
But they have. Go ahead, Mark.
It's not the chamber. It is the fact that the firing pin is round now instead of delta shaped, spear shaped,
Okay.
and it's going into the primer pocket and not coming back because it doesn't come back until you work the slide and extract it. And so when you're starting to lower trying to lower it down, it's actually catching on top of the primer pocket. And if you shake the gun or knock it, it'll fall back into the gun and allow you to clear it. But that is an issue we've seen. So what I did with my ST Action Pro is I took and filled a little silicone cock in the back of the primer pocket, and that corrected the problem. You don't see it for live ammo because you have the primer, but the primer pocket, the empty primer pocket, there's a cost for that.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of ST Action Pros, and they work fine in my Gen 5s, so they must have been after the change was made. But I know we keep at the agency, we keep the Glock brands on hand for if we have students shooting Gen 5s. That's just what we issue them for malfunction clearing training and for ball and dummy drills.
AZ Action Zoom is another one that has a primer pocket. They're true snap caps. But you know, I just fixed my own personal ST Action Pros with just filling full silicon. That's solved the problem.
Thanks for that information, because I had been told by someone else that there was a difference in the OGAVs, and that was causing it to grab onto the front of the dumping rounds on the ST Actions.
I don't think so. I think that's what it is.
Okay.
You shake the gun. If you shake the gun, get one, shake it, the gun will come down.
Okay. All right. John, you want to talk about the little devices that you've been using?
So hopefully this will show up on camera as far as this stuff goes. This is, I got these from concealedcarry.com. They had these in a bunch of different calibers. I think this is 9. I bought them in 40, 45, and they even make a 380 as far as that stuff goes. And I think this is showing up there's a distinct cut there at the back of what would be the case. And then it has these, what we would call fins here. And I'm not sure if it exactly causes a double feed or a failure to extract or something like that. The net result is, though, is you have to clear the gun the exact same way you would otherwise. The instructions say to load another round underneath of this. I've done it both ways, and it seems to work. That may be an artifact. I know that we were talking about 1911 specific clearances. I know there's some Glock specific clearances for Type 3s where you just simply drop the magazine, reseat it, and run the slide. That may be because they're trying to keep that set up for that kind of malfunction reduction, but they do seem to work really, really well. I have I think Lisa saw the video of like the ultimate casino or almost ultimate casino version, where you basically have one of these in a magazine of 5 rounds, a dummy in a magazine of 5, and then just 5 normal rounds. And you just have to shoot a casino while all that is unfolding, and it will definitely be a surprise when it happens. As with everything else plastic, the people I talked to that have shot them more, these are going to eventually wear out. They're not quite as cheap as the Glock Actions, but there doesn't seem to be a much better substitute, and they certainly do the job that you want them to do fairly well. And again, allows you to not have to just set the gun up as a raw motor skill to run. You can actually be firing along your merry way, and all of a sudden the gun has to, stops working, and you have to clear it by removing the magazine, running the slide, and reloading the gun. So they work really well for that.
There was a metal version floating around some years back. This is kind of like a product improved version. The metal one worked as well, and it did last longer, but I haven't seen those in anybody's hands in at least a decade.
Go ahead, John.
I would say probably cost of production. I would not surprise me if stuff like this was 3D printed or something like that. 3D printing is really changing, the cost of production on some of this stuff.
Is there a name for it so people can buy it? I know you said it was at concealcarry.com, but is there an actual name for the product?
Let me go look.
Double feed trainer or something like that.
When John finds that, he will post it in the show Facebook group along with the video that he referenced of him using.
I will try to get that video. Yeah, there's called a Type 3 malfunction round.
You got it.
And they run about, these are about $4 a piece. So they are not Glock cheap. But again, there's just not a whole lot of competition out there for them.
Very good.
And it's not something you're going to be using constantly either.
Nope, I agree. We brought up about different types of clearance like Glock has. There's one thing I've seen that supposedly Glock has been training on is malfunctions like that. You just push the magazine release, start racking the slide, magazine will fall out, junk will fall out, put a new magazine in and go. And it seems to work with Glocks. It does not work with all pistols. And that's what I try to do. All the stuff I teach the same way. So no matter what kind of pistol you got, unless it does not have a slide lock, that you lock it, rip it, rack it, and reload it. And that way I keep everything nice and simple with it. Eric, you probably remember this. Southern California agency was using Breda 92s, and the range master there was teaching that if you had anything go wrong with a gun, all you did was dump the mag and reload it. And that was 92s.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound familiar. I mean, we can kind of talk. What I'd like to do almost is go back and do a walkthrough on the failure to fire, failure to eject, and then get into the failure to extract. And we can throw in failure to chamber if we want. So, and then
I think it's important to discuss why these things happen. Why is the gun failing to fire, and why is the tap necessary? What's causing the problem, and how do you remediate it?
So, semi-autos, you've got an 8-step cycle of function. Sorry, I'll get it right. I'll use words. It's feed, chamber, lock, fire, unlock, extract, eject, cock, right? So any of the stuff that goes wrong is going wrong somewhere in that process. The smash, tap, roll, rack, however you want to get there, the reason the smash or the tap is part of it is to ensure the magazine is seated. Now, I've heard folks insist that magazines don't somehow suddenly get released from the gun. As a left-hander, I've experienced a lot of magazines coming unseated in some of the early holster designs where something would make contact with that mag release and cause the magazine to come unseated, right? So I was going to have a live round in the chamber, and if I had to shoot, I was going to get a second round click in those circumstances. The early fix was just as soon as I got out of the patrol car, reach down and press the magazine and ensure that it was seated in the gun, right? But we've also seen it happen. I've had students come to me and say, hey, just took a class, dude said run the slide, don't worry about seating the magazine. And then over the course of that class, we'll have 3 or 4 guys inadvertently, unintentionally end up with magazines not seated in the gun while working. So they're like, okay, this is why it's there. Yes, it's to ensure that the magazine is in fact seated in the gun. Whether you roll inboard and pinch or you roll outboard, right, or ejection port down for left-handers, while grabbing it overhand and ripping the slide off the back of the gun, it's not cycle it like a sewing machine. And I use the Singer sewing machine analogy not to offend anyone. People have gotten offended by it, but like, don't just work the slide back and forth, actually grab it, try to rip it. The reason behind the ejection port down is to allow gravity to assist in getting any junk out of there. And that works when you roll the gun to the right, whether you're right or left-handed. And that works both for a failure to fire and for the failure to eject, AKA the stovepipe, whether it's the casing sticking straight up or what we now see more commonly, that inline stovepipe, where it doesn't come all the way out of the ejection port and now it's trapped in there.
Not only have I seen the malfunction where the magazine was not seated, I personally experienced it on 2 occasions. Now, I will explain that in both of the instances in which it has happened to me, it was with a Glock with an extended mag release on and a pancake style inside the waistband holster. And when there was pressure put on the holster and it pushed the gun against the side of the holster, it partially ejected the magazine. One time it was first time I experienced it. I was doing a demo in a class and I drew the pistol and the magazine went flying downrange, which was always fun to have happen in front of students. The second time I did it, I just completely forgot about it. It was several years later. I was using a different pistol, didn't take note that it had the extended slide, mag release on it, put it in the holster. Later went down and sat down. And when I sat down, the magazine fell out of the gun. And clink, clink, clink. And when I got to fooling around playing with it, it was from that. Trying to diagnose it, it was the mag release button getting depressed by the holster.
And there was
John, I was carrying a 365 in my BDU pocket when I was still in uniform. So that was, basically being carried left-handed, and I ended up having to swap pocket holsters to something that better protected the magazine release. I would say the guys that say that never happens just haven't watched enough rounds go down range or lived with the guns long enough to actually see what happens.
One of the gentlemen advocating for it, I know he has seen a significant number of rounds go down range in his career. Kind of one of those we'll agree to disagree. He hasn't seen the mags come out, and I'm not sure how in his environment he didn't. I also wonder if with some of the folks advocating for this, it's not the timer, right? Like now they put the timer on and going from click to bang is quicker by just running the slide than it is going smash or tap and running the slide, right? So because it's faster on the timer, therefore it's a better option. I would argue on that. I want surer. I want to make sure the gun's going to run when I press the trigger again, right? And that's part of this, making sure the magazine's seated and then running the slide.
Well, we
Not
must
that
all
you guys
bow
are
to the
wrong.
timer.
I'm just giving you my reasoning why.
We must all bow to the timer because it is our overlord.
There's other concepts with that too, though, of trying to eliminate steps. One of the big ones is just to rip the mag out of the gun and work the slide. And for some guns, you can do that. There are some guns that allow you to do that. I will contend that it is hard if you have it set up, specifically set up with a case in the chamber or a dummy around the chamber and around trying to load on top of it. Usually that's done with a magazine that is only 1 or 2 rounds in it. It's not one down that's full or in there. And it's easier to rip them out because you can rip them. But when you do that, you are stretching that magazine where it's not designed to be stretched. Those feed lips are being expanded because they've got the slide coming in behind. They've got the feed ramp. And as you're pulling on that magazine out of the gun, you're actually causing those feed lips to expand. What we saw, Ohio Patrol was using SIG 220s here, and they had an enormous number of magazines that were spot welded to the rear with the old P220s and ripped the magazines and would actually break the welds, to the point that SIG said, we're not going to warrant the magazines anymore because you keep doing this. We're telling you to lock the slide back. And if you choose not to do that, this is now on you. And so our Highway Patrol actually bought a spot welder and re-spot welded the magazines that ripped. I was teaching a class in Hawaii with the Holland PD. And the guy said, I've always ripped my magazines out and I've never had any issues. I said, well, let me see your mags. And it was a 220. And all 3 of his duty mags had the feed lips broken on both sides of the feed lips. And it was just a matter of time before it failed. And he just looked at them like, whoa. And so that's the reason why I believe in locking the slide back if you can. Again, against some guns out there, you can't. A Walther PPK, you can't lock it back.
And we'll talk about this more when we get to the difference between the traditional failure to extract clearance and what's called the Glock failure to extract clearance, right? But when you try to transfer that over to some of the other designs, and I'm thinking specifically the staccato, that next up round ends up sitting real far forward. So when you do go to rip it, you can end up, I'll try to create this. And not with a Glock mag, not with an MP mag, but you'll end up with that round doing weird things. Now, if you go to reload that magazine into the gun, you have to pause, flip the top round off in order to seat it, because otherwise it's not going to go back in unless you reload it backwards from how you normally do a reload.
British style.
So John, I'll throw this to John and Lee. You guys specifically went up to take a Spalding class to see his stoppage. Did you see any differences with the stovepipe type clearance, right? The failure to eject clearance, with Dave's method versus the traditional roll rack?
Go ahead, John.
Let's say I firmly convinced that if I were starting over, I really like Spalding stuff. And I would say this: if I think we're at a point where there's enough advantage that if I was teaching a left-handed shooter from scratch, I think Spalding's method is superior for a left-handed shooter. I'm not sure that it is as compelling for a right-handed shooter as far as that stuff goes, but I mean, it definitely does work. I think it's just as efficient. I think the sticks. I don't know if I thought I had a blue gun around here, but just real quickly, because correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, it's not a traditional slingshot. You're actually using like the whole hand and the meat of the thumb to get on the slide. So it's not the traditional Fletzy slingshot. You're actually using that meat of that thumb to get in there.
Where is he getting on the slide? Forward of the ejection port or back?
Back,
yeah.
It's like gripping a golf club. Yeah, like gripping a golf club. Thumb down the shaft.
I don't play golf, so it doesn't.
Excuse me. Thumb down the shaft, wrapping the fingers over.
Okay. I have golf clubs. I need to go back to using them for what
we went to that class along with Tom Givens, just because we were at Tom's house one weekend, and we're watching one of Spalding's Penia videos up on Tom's TV. And so we're sitting around amongst ourselves talking about, well, what's he doing there? How's he doing that? And I was like, well, let's just go take the class. And so thankfully he had one coming up that was convenient for all 3 of us for location and schedule. And so rather than just sit around and talk about what we think some guy's doing, we went and took his class.
It's a crazy concept, I know.
Yeah. And let's go see what the man's actually saying firsthand. hear his explanations behind it, which you won't get in a little YouTube clip or whatever. Hear the explanations behind it and actually pressure test it. I'm with John that if I were starting over again right now, knowing what I know now, I would go straight inboard manipulations. Now, if I'm in my conscious mind, I go inboard. But because I've got primacy of the overhand, if I just get to running the gun and get pressed under pressure, a lot of times it goes to an overhand manipulation. What I have stopped doing as far as a teacher goes is that when I have a brand new person to the gun, when they pick up the gun the first time, what I see more often is most of them tend to inboard manipulate the gun. And I don't correct that now.
And that's my recollection is Dave talks about having seen
Yeah.
a bunch of that.
Yeah.
Right. Is like one of the reasons why he went that path.
Yeah.
We,
Mark,
okay, we teach, yeah, I was say we teach manipulating out toward the rotating the gun toward the ejection port side, whether you're right or left-handed, as a matter of this needs to be done for gravity. I mean, you got a small ejection port like on a P-35, a small ejection port. If you try to do it vertically, you could easily end up with another malfunction. So tilting that gun over is important.
Yeah.
So.
Before we move on to one more point on the inboard, John, you made a comment that it would seem to be more natural for lefties, and I saw Eric's head turn like a dog when he heard a funny noise. And we got two lefties on the panel here, so state your case, young man.
So my point with that is that if you're a right-hander and you do Dave's technique, the ejection port, the low side of the ejection port tends to end up. If you're a left-handed and you do Dave's technique, the low side of the ejection port tends to end up downwards. I think that was my primary thought with the advantages for the left-hander.
So just as a left-hander, when I go to the overhand and I roll inboard, same thing, right? It doesn't matter how I do it, the ejection port's going down anyway.
Right.
I've never done that with the gun as a left-hander to where my ejection port ends up upward.
For those that worship the timer, in my brief testing of it, I found out that my shot-to-shot times were faster with the manipulation going inboard versus overhand. And primarily, I think the cause of that was when I ran the action with the inboard manipulation and I turned the gun back vertical, my support hand established the grip right there at the play at what was basically the three position of a presentation. When I go overhand, I tended to drive the gun on out further, and then I'm playing catch up with the support hand trying to catch up to the gun. And I just found I was getting a much better presentation after whatever manipulation I had done. And therefore my times were faster.
So let me answer a question, guys, on Dave's technique, which I have not done, so I have no reference of experience with it. Does it work with the little guns, with the small slides and the short barrels and short slides? Is there enough to grab onto the way he wants you to grab onto it and not block the ejection port?
It has, in my little bit of experience with doing it with short slided guns. And John, I saw your message in chat. I will work on that. Y'all talk about something else while I'm doing this.
I would say so, unless you have, again, like an extreme mismatch, like somebody that's has very large hands and it's a 365. I always think of techniques as 80, 15, 5. You're going to have a base technique that works for 80% of the people. You're going to need something that works for a smaller group, maybe 15. And it's always useful to have something for that bizarre little 5% as far as that stuff goes. So I think it's definitely one of those 80% techniques.
So I have a question. So being the fact that we're all trainers,
Go right
do you
ahead.
guys advocate dumping the mag that is in the gun when you have a double feed, or holding on to it?
Get to that.
Okay. All right. That's something coming up. Thank you.
The only reason I'm saying that, Mark, is I want to hit a 1911 centric stoppage with a question and then go into the rest, just so it kind of almost flows logically.
Okay, fair enough. One thing that John brought up that I want to mention too is talking about why guns sometimes don't feed. And let's go back to 1911s. Is the ammunition, they were very sensitive and designed around hardball. when we went to 1911s, our agency did. Mine were modified. I had throated and ported and all that. And they fed almost everything. In fact, they fed everything really well. And we went to 185 grain Remington jagged hollow points because that's really the only hollow point that actually seemed to work well as far as feeding in an altered gun. When we went to our guys got Colts and other aftermarket 1911s, they would not feed the 185 grain jagged hollow points. And we had to scramble and trade all of our hollow points in, and we carried hardball for about almost 3 to 4 years till we could find some 45 hardball or 45 hollow points that would feed. And we went to Ranger SST when they started feeding reliably in unaltered Colts. But that's an issue with that magazine designs and etc. from the older design. It's designed around one type of ammo, so that's always part of the issue too.
So one question I want to ask for you guys, let me back up. So one of the other 1911 centric stoppages, let me get this to where you guys can see it, is the firing pin stopped dropping down. It was rare, but common enough that people taught a clearance for the firing pin block dropping down during the course of it. So generally under recoil, the spring working slight, the back of the firing pin would go forward, the block would drop down. Right, and stop it. Have you guys seen an issue with the staccatos, the prodigies, or any of the other double stack 9mm 1911s having that kind of stoppage occur?
I have not seen enough. Go ahead, John.
No, I haven't seen enough of them in class to see that issue. The one thing I have noticed is that there's something different in that the Rogers tap rack training aids don't like to work very well in those 2011 style pistols. They tend to get stripped out as part of that process. So there's definitely something different in that feeding process, mag lip design, stripper rail, whatever you want to call it. There's definitely something different in there.
Okay. I was just curious about that because that's that one odd 1911 centric stoppage and clearance.
Right there.
Yep.
This was from Chuck Taylor's combat handgun book from about 1983, 84, something in there. But that was a standard clearance drill from the 1911s. And most of that came from weak springs. Most of that issue developed in there, you were broken or a weak firing pin spring, allowing the firing pin to go farther forward and letting that plate drop back down, the firing pin retainer drop back down.
Eric, I haven't seen enough staccatos in class to notice.
I didn't know. I'm not seeing a lot of them. I mean, I've got a staccato, I've got a prodigy. One of the last classes I taught out at Gunsight, both of my coaches were shooting staccatos, right? So I was the odd man out shooting a plastic gun after years of being the guy with the custom gun. But I was just curious if people are seeing it with those. So.
All right, John, I believe you had a video you wanted to try to share.
For the video, it's just that, I know Mark looks like he's really old and doesn't know much of anything. And a lot of people think he's just making up stuff, but I was a 220 shooter for like eons as far as this stuff goes. And people just don't get that if you're around this stuff long enough, you do actually get to see stuff. And let's see, does everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Mark, do you recognize that?
Oh yes.
That's exactly what he's talking about. It's like, when you my experience was that was caused by when SIG actually, I didn't have a problem with double feeds, but when SIG added the option of an 8-round follower, the cramming an eighth round to that magazine is what completely killed that as far as that stuff goes. So again, if you're around this stuff long enough, it's not like weird one-offs. Like I have a whole bunch of 220 magazines that all have that exact same crack.
I've seen it on both sides, and that, like I said, that officer had all 3 of his duty magazines. Both sides were cracked like that, and amazing that is. I mean, to the gun's credit, it worked. He had no malfunctions during the class, but he looked at me really weird when I was talking about we should lock slide back, and that's when he looked at it and went, "Okay, all right, fair enough."
It's be one of those things that you don't know what to look for until somebody mentions it for you as well.
If you haven't seen it, if you don't know what it looks like, it just doesn't catch the eye.
Yeah.
So
Eric,
we want to go on to failure to extract.
Go right ahead, Eric.
All right. So as mentioned, AK the double feed, right? Round didn't come out, the case didn't come out of the chamber, the gun cycled. Now another one's trying to join in. Traditionally, the way this has been taught is tap roll rack. I don't feel the weight transfer go all the way forward, right? The slide slide didn't send the next round into the chamber. That's the indicator to go into the next one, which has been taught as lock the slide to the rear, strip, we're locking the slide to the rear to take the pressure off the top round of the magazine, strip the magazine out, put it in an armpit. I'll come back to that. Grab the slide once, twice, 3 times to clear it. If you can find a new magazine, great. If not, go to the old magazine that you pulled out of the gun. So let's kind of break the stuff down. We're locking the slide back to take the pressure off that top round in the magazine, right? So that now we can strip the magazine out without it being an issue. The retention is taught in the event that that's your last mag or your only magazine. And for some folks out there, hey, I get it, right? You've got the full belt of 3 extra spare magazines on you when you're working. The counter to that is talk to the vast majority of decent, normal human beings we work with, and we're doing good to get them to carry guns all the time. That spare magazine may not exist, right? That may be the only round they have. So if we're teaching them to dump that mag,
Yes.
most of them are going to be hosed. Why the 3 on the overhand, the 3 racks? Right, that extractor claw is not designed to slam over the round in the chamber. It's designed to have that rim slide up underneath it as the slide goes forward. So the 3 are giving it the best chance to set and rip that case out of the chamber. Now you could have a broken extractor, you could have busted the rim on the case, right? In which case it doesn't matter how many times you do it, it's not coming out. That's why backup guns are still important, right? That's why executing the Nike defense may be the best option on occasion, but it's not run like a sewing machine. It's not back and forth, it's rip on it. Okay. And then we go to reload, come down. If you can find a full magazine, great. If not, you go back to that magazine that came out of it. The original teaching on dumping the mag, while I don't have this in writing, my thought from talking to guys was when the terminology was double feed, it was like the magazine in a rifle. Get rid of the magazine, it caused the problem. Except that's not where the problem is in a pistol.
I'm going to go back into what you're saying. That I think that the 1911 magazines, again, we're designing our techniques, were notorious for quality control. You could have magazines, GI ones that were, from 1911, and some were great and some wouldn't. And then when you went to the military, bought aftermarket magazines to try to fill the need for logistics, the magazines were up speed. Beretta was a big issue with that in both Desert 1 and Desert 2, and then had the aftermarket magazines that would not work when they got dirty at all, and they were having issues with them. So if it's a magazine related issue that's causing it, putting the old magazine is going to make it worse. But how often is that the case? Now, that was what I was leading to that question is it the magazine that's causing the issue? And if it isn't, then it's going to be faster to put it in. We teach not only under the arm, we also teach keeping them in hand, if you can do both hands, especially off-duty stuff. We talk about specifically off-duty, that guys are only carrying one magazine because they're lazy. And having that skill and train it, if all you ever do is your malfunction clearance is dump your magazine, that's exactly what you're going to do on the street if you don't have a spare. So the idea of saving the mag in some ways is not a bad idea.
The late Tiger McKee used to teach trapping it up underneath the pinky finger of the strong hand as you did the slide manipulations. Then it's right there to grab and put back in the gun.
That's okay if you've got big hands, but if you've got IBO with a Glock 21 magazine, are they going to be able to do that?
Right.
IBO, itty bitty officer. Sorry, I forgot to tell you what that is.
And I've got short fingers, so some of that now that I'm been carrying a double stack for almost 15 years, that's just not going to be an option, right? Like I got to put that thing somewhere else to do the manipulations. I can do it with a flashlight, but with a magazine, it gets to be difficult. So what has come along courtesy of the Glock, and it seems to work on most other stuff, is unload the gun, reload the gun, run the slide. If that works on the gun when it's dirty, filthy, nasty, right, rock on and do it. The question is, will it work on everything? It does seem to work on all the polymer frame pistols because there's just enough give and flex. But it doesn't work on I haven't found it to work consistently on steel frame guns. And from what I see on the magazines with the staccatos and the prodigies, with the way that next round sits real far forward, as it creates creates problems. So if you know it works on your polymer frame gun, rock, and that's what you carry, rock on and do it. Otherwise, the lock, rip, rack works across the board on everything. It's just slower.
Yeah, when I was speaking earlier and I said to unload the gun, reload the gun, I was talking about ripping that magazine out and then reloading with another magazine.
Okay, yeah.
Not
Most of
like
what
what you not what you just demonstrated. I have seen people advocating for that, and I agree. It worked for some guns, but it doesn't work with others. Also, to go with something you said earlier, I want to go with the sure technique, not the one because it saves a little time if it works. If it works.
And that's, I've gotten into philosophy rather than like techniques that will support the philosophy or the principle. Maybe that's a better word, right? I need this gun back in action. I absolutely have to need it to work. So something that's surer, but a little slower, I'll go with that one every time. It's, you know, the principles like on the reloads and stuff is to why I'm doing what I'm doing, but we're talking stoppages.
Yeah.
It's been good. Nobody said the word jam tonight. This is awesome.
That's what you
Until
put on,
just now.
that's
You
what you
just
put
did.
on for breakfast with a musical instrument.
Yes.
John alluded to it, that familiarity and making sure that you're, I can't even remember the words, exact words you use, but if you're going to use something, go to it, practice it, stay with it, stay with it, stay with it. You're going to try something new, fine, because there's always nice ways to learn, because we need to learn new things all the time. But then whatever you're going to finish with, if you're going to go to that technique, then use it exclusively and not try to go back and forth. One of the disadvantages, I guess, as a trainer who trains agencies from all over the country with every type of weapon system out there, as far as handgun wise, is trying to learn all the little different idiosyncrasies with them and remember those idiosyncrasies when you're demonstrating with that gun. If I'm doing a military class, I'll take a SIG or a Beretta. I took a Beretta 92. I'm not a Beretta guy, but I took a Beretta 92. Teach military class now. I take my SIG 320 and go through it and use that because I want to make sure I'm teaching stuff that'll work for their guns. But when I've got a mixed match, it's good to have that technique of one that works for everything. Don't care what it is. That technique of locking it, ripping it, racking it, reloading it will work for everything.
All right, guys, we have perhaps the most impressive thing about tonight is that we have managed to talk about malfunction clearances for an hour and a half. Because I'm like, okay, that'll take like 10 minutes. Then what are we going to talk about the rest of the time? And we've gone an hour and a half. Is there anything anybody else needs to say about malfunction clearances before we do a wrap up?
The only thing I'd add is just practice them.
I
I
would
would
say,
say is,
hey, John. Okay.
my advice is, one of the best ways, and I know this is heresy in 2024, and it's already been alluded to avoid this whole thing from happening, is just occasional maintenance of the gun. For 20 years, I watched some 20, however many years, I actually did finally get to see a SIG that was so dry it would not function. It was literally bone dry. That's the only like modern service pistol I've actually seen do that. But if you just clean the damn thing and keep some lube on it, occasionally refresh your ammo, you can avoid a lot of this well in advance.
Devil's argument, right? And this, I would say your stuff probably supports it, but if you watch some of the body worn camera footage, we're seeing the failures to extract happen with compromised kind of aw shit draws.
Absolutely.
Right. So now if you take a gun that's not maintained, it's not lubricated, and you had no idea the bad man was going to do bad things to you, it sets up a really bad system. I hate to keep using that word, but it sets up a problem because you've got a gun that's compromised and a grip that's compromised, and you're going to end up with a stoppage in the middle of the fight. And a lot of folks that's happening to aren't carrying backup guns because of perfection.
And they don't practice the techniques, so they're programmed to happens. They automatically go to it. One thing we didn't address, Lee, which I think is important, that not only do you do these with two hands, you need to be practicing malfunction clearances with one hand, because you may lose use of a hand, the other hand's occupied, whatever the case is. You may have to do a malfunction of a tap rack with only one hand, or do a feedway clearance with only one hand, left or right-handed, both. You guys were mentioning about clean guns, and it goes to a good point on this. There was an agency south of me that an officer got put on the hood of a car, and the guy was trying to throw him off the hood, and he drew his Glock 19 and was holding on with one hand and fired one round, and the gun malfunctioned because he hadn't cleaned it in over a year since the last time he qualified. To his credit, he did a tap rack by racking it onto the hood of the car and then using his mouth and teeth to rack the slide and get the gun in the fight and shot the guy, and the guy glided to a halt and the deputy got off. So of the hood.
It's a cool story, but it would just been nicer if the gun had just kept working, right?
Yes.
Would have been a lot nicer.
I had something I was going to say, but I went completely blank listening to that going, wow.
All right. My final thought on this too is malfunction clearances need to be done daytime and nighttime. And if you're not doing them nighttime, close your eyes. You don't have the luxury of being able to look at the gun and know what's going on with it. You need to be able to clear it by feel, know what it feels like to do it with your eyes closed, and practice. The more you practice with it, the more it'll become that programmed response, and you'll be able to respond with it. So that's my final thought.
All right, it just popped back into my head. I have a class that I used to call critical pistol skills, and I had prerequisites on it. Like you must be a graduate of a police academy, or you must be at least IDPA sharpshooter or the like, because I figured those people would have the gun handling skills, to get through this class. And it was all what you were just talking about, Mark, doing everything with one-handed. And we would start the class doing everything freestyle, then we'd do everything strong hand only, do everything support hand only. After a couple of just crazy adventures in instructing out on the open enrollment circuit, I renamed that class to Pistol Craft Level 4. And you must have come through at least 1 and 2 and 3 with me to get through my Pistol Craft Level 4. I'm not doing that just as an open enrollment. Anybody just show up anymore. You have to have some sort of history with me so that I've seen you handle a gun before I teach that class again. Now I do call that, in the outset of the class, it's a 1% skill. It's not something that you need to be constantly worried about training on, as far as like a whole lot of your time. But it's one of those things that you need to be proficient at because you don't want to be trying to learn it as it's happening to you in a gunfight. Like how to rack the slide with your teeth.
Eric?
Both of you look like you were going to say something, so I paused.
Oh, I'm just visualizing the racking the slide with the teeth after a feedway stoppage. That's all. It's painful. So
you're going to try it once you turn the camera off.
Maybe.
Plot around it. We'll do it bare metal.
Anyway, we know they happen. We know these stoppages happen, right? And we know that tap, roll, rack, regardless of which direction you orient the ejection port, clears the vast majority of them, right? If it doesn't, then you need to go into the diagnostic clearance, get the pressure off the round trying to go in the chamber either by stripping the mag out or by locking the slide back and working through it from there, right? Sure, not necessarily faster unless you know without a doubt that it works in your gun. I haven't seen the amount of stoppages happen in proactive situations where people knew, hey, I'm drawing the gun because I'm going to go around the corner for the bad guy. They seem to happen far more often when like, oh, the bad guy just came around the corner and I didn't think this would happen to me. So the more prepared you can be and the better grip you get, it's going to minimize that other 10%, right? But practice them.
I want to throw out something from the instructor point of view because I see this a lot. There's so many instructors, and Eric and I have had this problem our whole life, that have no concept of how to teach these techniques to a left-hander. You owe it to your students to teach them and give them the same skills that you're giving your right-handed students. So you need to learn how to do these techniques right and left-handed to be able to demonstrate them properly, so you don't send them out in the field and your left-handers doomed to failure because you didn't show them how to operate the gun left-handed to lock a slide back using the trigger finger, or taking the magazine out of the gun from there without having to have it with your thumb. So trainers, learn how to do this left-handed. Show your students you care about them and give them the skills they need. And I say this because when I was in the Air Force, they taught me nothing of how to work a revolver left-handed. They made me draw the gun with a right-handed holster, change hands, shoot, reload it as a right-hander, put it back. And even at 18 years old, I knew that was stupid. And so I had to learn how to operate that revolver left-handed, and it's much more efficient left-handed than it is right-handed in many ways. But I had to learn that myself, and that should never be something that a student comes to you and says, "Hey, I had to do this, and you didn't teach me that." So, thank you.
John, any last words on the topic?
No, I think we've hit it pretty good as far as that stuff goes.
All right, Eric, what do you got upcoming?
Actually getting to a really busy period of time here. Teaching at Guardian Conference in Oklahoma City in a couple of weeks, then doing 2.5 weeks at Gunsight, then Thunderstick Summit up at the farm in Utah. I'm on calendar right now to go back to the Midwest to do pistol mounted optics instructor for a large Midwest agency that's getting a new pistol and aim point acros on them. I will turn around from that, head down to the Southwest border, teach low light instructor, and then another pistol mounted optics instructor class on the border. I head back up more my way to do a closed enrollment class for some folks who do religious service defense stuff on low light and optics. And then in November, it's back to Gunsight for the first advanced pistol class, the optics only version of it, and then revolver roundup. In December, it looks like, it'll be Meade Hall for a hybrid version of the pistol mounted optics instructor. John's going to warm them up the day before with some of his material. And then possibly looks like to finish out the year, I'm talking to another agency about another low light instructor class. And once I hear from them, then we'll put that out openly.
All right, Mark, you got anything upcoming?
Like Eric, I'm doing Thunderstick. I'll be there with him, and also Revolver Roundup in November. Most of my stuff is contract agencies that I just do my own personal stuff. Is almost everything's contracted law enforcement. The training company I work for, they have instructor schools that go on, but everything I've got right now is a closed school. So I really have no open enrollment till June, and that'll be my annual class up at Devil's Tower, Wyoming. And you can get a hold of me through that, through my email at AFTT17@msn.com if you're interested in any of those classes. I also do private stuff if people want to get me and hook me up, but my schedule's pretty packed. My wife and I do a lot of vacations, as you guys know. We travel a lot, so I don't have to work as hard anymore.
Oh, can I just throw one thing out? And this
Sure.
applies to all of us that are here. If you're an agency, if you're a host, if you've got a range and you're looking at stuff for 2025, most of us are saying, hey, if you want to do a 2025 class, give us a holler. Reach out, because we're trying to put stuff together. We know there's some uncertainty going on, but the sooner you can reach out to folks and get them locked in, the better it's going to be in terms of the dates that you want to get them out there for. Thanks.
John?
So I've got a couple things. I'm looking forward to this. The dummy rounds and all that stuff. Is that coming across there?
Yes.
There's a private class coming up in Indiana. And they've got their own exclusive handout for that goes. So I've got that. I'm going to be in Culpeper in October. Cognitive Pistol was completely sold out, but I had a cancellation. I think there's one seat left in Cognitive Pistol for Culpeper right now, if you want to grab on that. I'm also doing Who Wins, Who Loses, and Why there, if you want to catch the lecture. That same week, I'm going to be in Illinois on the October 11th. There's a free class if you're in LEO. They have a regional refresher thing. So I'll be doing Who Wins, Who Loses, and Why for absolute free if you're in LEO. You don't have to be an Illinois LEO. You just have to be an Leo willing to travel to Illinois. I'm speaking out west, Pacific Northwest in November. The Range Master Instructor Reunion. Then I'm going to be heckling Gelhaus during his Red Dot Instructor class in December. I'm working on some stuff for 25. I've already got some stuff booked, but kind of like a client thing. I'm going to give their students first shot at some of that stuff. But let me just say, probably Amarillo and Nebraska at the very least. I'm trying to travel a little bit further. So I'll get those dates pushed out as soon as I know when they're going to be.
All right. I have a trigger management class scheduled for October the 20th, and that one is moving pretty quickly. I'm hoping to be back up in action at that point, and I should be. One last thing on the cataract removal. And it's just in general. Folks, if you have been bold like a frog, quit putting that off and go get stuff taken care of. I went from okay, it was getting kind of hard to see the front sight, to I could only see certain colors of front sights, to I went to pistol mounted optics and didn't have a problem. And then I went to a Club Warner revolver class and I started getting out my revolvers and I noticed I could not see the front sight at all, shooting with my right eye, which is my dominant eye. And for that class, I shot, turning my head using the cross-eyed dominant trick, so that I could get my left eye behind the sights. And I mentioned that, and Tim Burke, who most of you know, I mentioned that on a show. Tim immediately pinged me, you need to go to the doctor right now because it could be something else and everything. And so I went, and that's when they found, the cataract had progressed to the point that it was causing me so much of an issue. Um, Let me tell you how life changing this was. I had the procedure on Thursday of last week, and I just had one eye done. I walked into the classroom where I had been teaching since December the 1st. And I noticed for the first time that our emblem on the wall has raised letters on it. All this time I would look at that sign and I thought that the letters were painted on the emblem. No, they're actually wooden letters glued onto the emblem, the raised letters. That's how substantial the change in my sight has been. Okay. I'm ecstatic to get the other one done. They were like, look, it's going to take like 17 days for your eyes to completely heal, for you to see the full benefit of everything. I'm like, if this is all I'm getting, I'm ecstatic right now. Sign me up. I'm a happy camper. It was that dramatic of a change in my vision. Um, and if you got something else that's nagging at you and everything, it's just not worth hurting. Just go get it fixed. Uh, you all know I had the hand surgery a couple of months ago. I've been fighting that for 2 years. And finally, I just got one day I couldn't take it anymore and I went and got the surgery done. Folks, don't do that. If you're hurting, go get it looked at, get it fixed. If you're having a problem with your vision, go get your eyes checked by a real honest to goodness ophthalmologist. Get them checked, get them figured out. Take care of yourself. And, thank you to all the guys who agreed to participate on the show tonight. And thank you to the audience. I understand that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.